Hi everyone, this is Mark Betts at ASAP Accounting and Payroll. It is June 4th, approaching 3 p.m. Last night the Senate passed the House bill, or their version of the House Bill 7010, and we've conducted a few readings this morning, and we wanted to provide some of our notes after our first reading. And so keep in mind this is not yet signed bill, or hopefully it'll be signed by the time you're into law. And we also are going to keep in mind just that we need to understand the caveats of these changes and the impacts on the guidance that the Treasury will be publishing to lenders and borrowers, hopefully soon as possible. Everyone is focusing on a few key provisions, mainly the 24-week provision, extending the coverage period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, and also on the 60-40 rule. But we're gonna look at those a few items here, and these are going to be we're going to point out some questions that we have that we'll be focused on as we study the guidance from Treasury over the coming weeks. And these are all things that you might look at and how it impacts your business. So our number one concern is the 24-week extension, or moving it from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, is a big win for a lot of employers. But it also comes with a big concern for us initially. And so this is from the language from the bill right there. And our first concern is, if you go back to the original legislation, you had to maintain employment levels. This is the FTE values. You had to maintain an average FTE value over your 8-week coverage period equal to a reference period in the past in order to receive maximum forgiveness. So our concern is, now that they've changed, or employers have the option of moving from an 8 to a 24-week coverage period, would employers have to maintain average FTE values over a longer 24-week period of time? Why is that a concern? Because many employers have not returned to full productivity with their staff. They're seeing reduced revenues, and there really is no way for them to sustain that kind of FTE value with the sales volume that they're seeing at their businesses without help from a PPP fund source. And the PPP money was only for 8 weeks of payroll, not 24 weeks of payroll. So keep that in mind. So also, it's important to know you don't have to move to a 24-week coverage period if you received your PPP loan prior to this law becoming signed. So you have the option of choosing or sticking with your original 8-week coverage period. You can skip this change, and you can continue if you're about to complete your loan on 8-week schedule. I don't think you would want to go to a 24-week schedule potentially, but we'll see, because as we'll get in, we'll discover some more. So just keep that in mind. You may want to study whether the move to 24 weeks is in your best interest. One other thing about moving the coverage period to 24 weeks that we found, and a question we have, is what is the impact on the individual employee wage limit prorated $100,000 cap? Prior, we were calculating that based on 8 weeks, which equated to $15,385. If you moved it to a 24-week coverage period, does that mean the annual salary cap could be expanded to $46,000? That's a question we have. The other question is the limitation for sole proprietors. Does that still limit their ability on that to use the fund's 852 equation of their Schedule C, or does that change as well to be based on 24 weeks rather than 8 weeks? That's a question. But here's the one impact that we think could have the biggest impact on employers, and we're hopeful that this is going to the interpretation that we have matches the legislation's intent and Treasury's interpretation. And that is these exceptions to the reductions in FTE. So inside this language, and we're focused on page 3 and 4 of the House bill, there at the top here of end of page 3, it speaks to during the period February 15th through or ending December 31st, the amount of loan forgiveness under this section shall be determined without regard to a proportional reduction in the number of full-time equivalent employees if an eligible recipient in good faith has done either A or B. Okay, so this ability to disregard the FTE calculations would be huge for employers. And so what does it mean? What are the impacts? So if an eligible recipient in good faith is able to document an inability to rehire individuals or inability to hire similarly qualified individuals, then you could essentially request or seek could be another safe harbor provision essentially. So or similar to the 11-page exceptions to the FTE reduction that were spelled out in the 11-page forgiveness application on May 15th. So I don't see much change in this A provision that we're pointing out here. This seems in line with the exceptions spelled out on the 11-page application. Perhaps I'm missing something. Perhaps it's more generous. I don't know just quite yet. But Section B is the one we're really focused on here. And so in here, it adds language giving employers, borrowers an exception to their FTE reductions if they were unable to open due to guidance from Health and Human Services, CDC, or OSHA. And those are federal agencies, keep in mind, not state or local agencies. So what essentially the reading on this is if the business had an inability to return to the same level of business activity as such was operating at before February 15th due to compliance with requirements from those agencies, federal agencies, not state, essentially, can they do away with the FTE calculations? If that's correct, if that's the reading, this impacts every restaurant in the United States. Now no longer has to worry about the FTE calculations because they can apply for the exception to the FTE calculations based on the fact that CDC guidance required social distancing and or impacted their ability to service clients or operate normally. That may be a liberal interpretation on my part. That's what we're going to wait for Treasury to see. But that would be the provision that is going to be the real impact across for PPP borrowers, essentially. Because and the other question, are they saying that the CDC guidance prevented them from having normal operations at some point between March 1st and December 31st, at any point during that date range or throughout that date range? Because we don't know what CDC guidance is going to be in the fall. We don't know what CDC guidance is going to be in terms for employers and restaurants. How is that going to impact in the future? My guess is that this is if they're going to be generous, it would be at any single point during that period of time, which essentially almost every business owner in America. So this could be huge. We are cautious and want to hear from Treasury and their interpretation of this. We want it to become law. Obviously, it hasn't been signed yet as of 2:55 on June 4th. Let's wait and see. But this could be the provision that allows employers to comfortably choose the 24-week coverage because they don't have to maintain FTE values because they were impacted by CDC, and therefore they would have plenty of time to spend essentially as much as they could on payroll, even though now there's a 60-40 rule. So the 60-40 rule, let's touch base on real quick. It seems pretty straightforward that it's moving the numbers essentially from the Treasury's imposed 75%, reducing that to 60-40, 60% on payroll costs, 40% on non-payroll costs. It does not change the terms on what's included or not included under those two categories. It's not redefining included items or not included items. It's just changing that percentage from 75-25 to 60-40. However, there is a concern here in the language because if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, the guidance spoke to using 75% of forgiveness amount on payroll, whereas this language speaks to 60% of the covered loan amount of payroll cost. What's the difference there? let's say you are a borrower who was planning on, after the 8 weeks was up, requesting 80% of your loan be forgiven rather than 100% of the loan forgiven. Would you be required to show 60% of that forgiveness amount or 60% of the higher original loan amount? So that is one of the interpretations there for employers that were anticipating requesting loan forgiveness less than the full amount of the loan, essentially, would be those who have concerns there. So anyway, in summary, this Section B interpretation, how generous is it, would be a big question. If it's very generous to employers impacted by CDC at some point at all, then more employers, yes, will then be looking at the 24-week period, and then what are the limitations on the 24-week period as well. There's probably something that we're not seeing yet, so just keep your ears open. We will have more once Treasury comes out with some additional guidance. Thank you.